Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm glad to see some folks are already here. We're going to talk dahlias today, and I'm super excited about that. We're all going to cross our fingers that the technological glitches that plague me on lives do not follow me to this one. So right away, I want to introduce you guys all to my friend Kath. Kath is the horticulture consultant for Longfield Gardens, but more importantly than that, she's sort of my dahlia cohort. We talk dahlias all the time. And interestingly enough, our taste in dahlias seem to change simultaneously. Like last year, we were both we started comparing lists of what we were going to get, and we were getting all the same color range. So it's interesting. So everybody just give me a little hello if you guys are, I think we're seeing everybody good. You guys can hear us all okay, correct? A little thumbs up or a yes would be great just to make sure. Hello, everyone from Muskegon across the lake. Okay, so we're going to roll right into this. Just so you guys know, we've got Marissa helping us out in the background. So Marissa's going to be helping us out so we can show some pictures on the screen while we do this. Oh, thanks for the heads up there, guys. Appreciate that you guys are saying that. She's also going to help feed us some comments. Probably what we're going to do is try to just keep your questions coming. But at the end, Marissa will grab some comments for us or questions for us to answer at the end. So if you guys didn't know, well, first of all, hi, Kath. Welcome.
Hey, Erin. Coffee in there?
What's that?
Is that coffee in there?
No, it's not. Just water. Just water.
Naturally this fast. Okay.
Right. You know, I think you guys, if you guys follow me, you guys know that I'm a bit of a dahlia. I'm a little obsessive about them. I think last year I grew somewhere around 100, which was too many, if there is such a thing. But I do love growing them. And Kath, tell us about your dahlia obsession.
Yeah, I too grew 100, which I'm not sure I'm proud of. This year, my goal is to grow half that many. So yeah, I came to dahlias about 12 years ago, maybe. And I mostly grow them to trial for Longfield and also to take photos, and just because they're cool and I want to grow them all.
Didn't you grow some? Weren't you growing some for a wedding a couple of years ago too? Is that right?
Yep. I've done some weddings in the summertime just for friends and stuff. But I have a big cutting garden, and dahlias are there, but they're also in the vegetable garden, and they're kind of like you, wherever you can fit them in.
Wherever you can shoehorn one in, they go in there. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So did you want to talk a little bit about how your dahlia growing season went last year?
Yeah. We actually heard, at Longfield, we hear from a lot of customers, and it was probably not the best dahlia growing year from what we heard. I don't know how would you say your year was?
My year was actually really good.
Okay.
But I know that was unusual based on what I heard too.
Yeah. So pretty much the whole East Coast had a pretty bad year. For me, I'm in Zone 4B in Northern Vermont. And it's not a great dahlia growing place because it's just not a long season. But last year it was really cold to start. We had snow at the end of May, or like middle up toward the end of May, like 6 inches. Then it got 90 degrees like the next week, and it was 90 until August, and no rain. Yeah. So we had a really bad drought. Then it got really cold and wet, and it was super wet. The ground was saturated. September came, and it was great. And then we got 3 days of killing frost the third week of September.
Oh.
So it was like a really bad year.
Yeah.
And so what I experienced, which a lot of people experienced, was just the dahlias didn't really put on much size. And if they don't have a lot of size, they just don't have a lot of energy, and they can't make as many flowers. So I had a percentage of mine that just never flowered. They only got like 2 feet tall. Yeah. And they, a lot of people find dahlias are super easy to grow. It really depends on your climate, a lot of that. And if they're not, they are not as easy as some things, but, that doesn't keep us from growing them, does it?
No, we don't seem to mind at all that they are a little needy sometimes.
Next year. Yeah, let's have fewer that bloom. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I got pretty lucky last year. We had a really good gardening season last year. It was very moderate. We never had super hot. We had a fair amount of even rain. I have no business complaining about any. I mean, I had a few insects problems, and that was it basically last year, dahlia wise. I can't complain about anything. So it was a pretty good year.
Well, the thing about dahlias is that, and which people may or may not know, is that they really like that kind of thing where it's no extremes. They like 60-degree nights, 80-degree days. That's it, you know, and if they get that, which is the Pacific Northwest, that's why people grow them just wonderful dahlias there, because it's much more consistent.
Yeah.
So if you live in a hotter climate, you have some issues, or like me, a colder climate, you also have some issues. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the Pacific Northwest, those lucky ducks over there, they have all that beautiful gardening.
Grow anything, apparently.
I know, right? Yeah. Did you want to you want to share a couple of tips? Because I think we were sort of talking about some dahlia tips that we could share with people, because I think people love dahlia tips.
One tip I have is this applies more to sort of dahlia crazy people like us who want certain varieties, and that's to order really early. We start selling dahlias in December, and if you go on the website now, there's a bunch that are sold out. So the desirable ones go really fast, or not desirable ones, they're all desirable, as we know.
Right.
But the ones that might be more unusual or whatever, sell out. So if you want something special, get shopping early and get them ordered. If you can't find them, I was just going to mention Dahlia Addict. If people don't know about that website, is a really great resource, and they list who has it's by variety, so you can look up the variety you're looking for, and they'll tell you who has it, which is really nice. And the other thing I was going to say is just to grow. The other tip is grow different kinds. Like, a lot of people don't know there's so many different kinds of dahlias. There's dinner plate dahlias and decorative dahlias and singles and doubles and anemone flowered, and there's a lot. And then within those kinds, there's all different colors. And some of them may grow better for you than others. I mean, plus you may like some of them better than others. Like you were saying, you go through phases. Like right now, it seems like the singles and the collarettes are really popular, and I saw that in England probably starting like 5 or 6 years ago, and now they're kind of catching on here too. And the cool thing about those is that they're really pollinators just go crazy for those. And they're not really available from farmers markets and in the floral industry, because they're just not, they're kind of fleeting. It's like a daisy kind of a form, and they don't travel that well. So if you want to grow those, you really got to grow them yourself. And that's kind of fun.
Yeah. I think so many people come to dahlias because when people think of a dahlia, they think of the giant dinner plate. And that's when you get a picture of a dahlia in your head, that's what you think of.
Yeah.
And then you get there and there's this whole world of dahlias. I can't tell you the number of times that I'm really into those singles. And I think people have seen me share a lot of those singles. And we're going to show a picture later on of HS Date, which is my #1 favorite single. But people see that and they don't believe me. It's a dahlia. They have no idea unless once you start going down this road of dahlia obsession, that exists, because they think it's a Gerber daisy or something.
Right.
It's weird. So
yeah.
So my big tip is that I think we all want to grow dahlias, but they do need certain things, and if you can't give it to them, that's when you start running into problems, and then people get disappointed that their dahlias aren't growing. So I mean, I think actually, Kathy, you might have been the first one who said this to me, but it makes perfect sense, which is give them what a tomato wants. They want full sun, they want consistent moisture, they want well-draining soil, and you can find that like anywhere. You can find that in a raised bed or the ground or a pot or whatever. But if you try to push that a little bit, I mean, I will say I do grow some dahlias in certainly part sun for sure, not full sun. And that works out fine here. And certainly I would think in hotter areas that'd work out okay. But you're not going to be able to stick a dahlia in shade and have anything work out well.
or in clay soil.
Yeah, right. The drainage is a big deal.
Right. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. What about bugs and stuff, Kath? What advice do you have for people about that?
Yeah. Well, again, you may be blessed and just not have an issue. But I have some here with my dahlias. And my big ones are slugs and snails in the spring. They love the really new growth. So if you live where it's kind of damp, you might have trouble with those. I use slug pellets and just keep after them. And then the other is earwigs. Do you have those?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And those,
they're gross.
Yeah, they're definitely gross. I don't usually mind musk bugs. I hate those things.
I know. Well, they look like they're going to attack you in your
I
sleep
know,
or something.
those
They're horrible.
wings like this. Yeah. But those nibble on the buds. And so often the flowers, when they'll open, if you see a flower that opens and it's kind of deformed, it's because the earwigs have been feeding on the bud. So the thing that I've found works best, and I sort of got this from Deborah Kay. She runs Bear Creek Farm, I think, in Western Mass. And she grows dahlias for like the really super high-end Manhattan market. And I went to workshop on her farm, and she really is all about extreme health and cleanliness. So she keeps her garden bed, her dahlia beds, they're like, I mean, there's nothing except the dahlias. You know, she doesn't mulch. If anything like leaves come off or you deadhead or something, they never get pitched in the path. They get taken out of the garden. So she really believes that like cleanliness is really important. And it's true that earwigs, where they live, is on decaying matter. And so I used to mulch my dahlias with shredded leaves. I don't do that anymore. And I'm really good at deadheading.
Yeah.
And take the stuff out of the garden. Don't just, it's because it's easy to like nip their heads off and throw them as you go, you know, nip like that.
I've been guilty of that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Don't say I never do it, but try to bring a truck or something with you and take all that stuff out of the garden. And I think that helps.
Yeah. So what do you have a favorite method for, you said you use slug repellent, and a lot of those slug repellents, I think there's at least one that is also an earwig repellent as well. So do you use those repellents? That's what you're using?
I
basically?
do.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, how do you tell if it's, I guess it could be worse.
Right.
I don't know. It depends again on the weather.
Yeah.
You know, if it's
the weather is right. The weather, and I don't know that there's necessarily scientific evidence about this, but in my anecdotal experience, a healthy plant is less likely to be attacked by some sort of bug. It seems to me like they gravitate towards plants that are distressed in some way anyway. So all these other things, like, a little airflow is good, which is not what I did last year. I planted them way too close last year.
Right? Yeah.
Oh, you bet. Well, how am I supposed to get 100 dahlias in my garden if I don't jam them in there with a shoehorn, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think I 100% agree that when they're healthy, they can resist so much more. And as I said, this last year, it was just like one stressor after another.
Yeah.
And they just were, you could tell they were just like, And then finally in September, when the weather changed, they just were like the most beautiful plants, lush and like dark green, and just like, okay, now we're going to do it. And then
you got the frost.
Yeah.
That's a bummer. So, one of the things that I think you and I talk about a lot is sort of this idea of kind of pampering your dahlias. And this, I mean, they're not I think you said this already, they're not like a set it and forget it kind of plant. They're definitely something that needs some assistance. So
adoration.
Right. So, I mean, I would say from the get-go, staking. I mean, maybe this is one of those mistakes you have to make before you really learn your own lesson. But because I've learned a lesson, like every year, I'm like, it's not going to fall over. Look, it's fine. It's fine. And I'm like, well, of course it fell over. Yeah. I didn't stake it. So I've become much better about staking.
They have hollow stems. Not
Yes.
everybody knows that, so that they do need support. Yeah.
So I actually have now gotten smart after however many years of not being smart and assuming I'd get to it. In most cases, I just stake right when I plant them.
I do too.
So especially so if anybody watching, if you guys have seen where I grow my big dinner place, which is against the house, a south facing wall against the house, I do Florida weave methods. So basically I put a pole between each dahlia, and then I just sort of weave it, and then I add another row of twine as the dahlias get taller and taller and taller. And usually I put those poles in, those are like, they probably stick out of the ground maybe just under 4 feet, because I think I use 5 foot poles, so they're about 4 feet tall. And so what happens is that there is some dahlias sticking up on top of that, but generally it's fine. It's not until you get like those huge ones with the giant flowers, and then I can kind of see when they're listing.
Yeah,
you have to go in there and adjust it a little bit. So staking, don't skip on the staking. I would say if you don't want to stake, look for the shorter varieties that you don't need to stake.
There are some good ones that grow about the top out about 3 feet, and those, depending again at how windy it is and stuff, you can sometimes get by, like Bishop of Llandaff, for instance. The singles and collarettes are often shorter.
Yep.
And that's a nice thing for avoiding staking, but it's also good for perennial beds. I think that they're nice in a perennial bed because they're a little bit looser. And I think they fit better in a perennial bed than sometimes the big honking ones look a little horsey in a bed.
Yeah, no, at 100% agree with that. The other thing I would say is watering, just consistent water. My dahlias got a million times better once I hooked them up on drip. At least the ones I grow alongside the house, which don't get a lot of rainfall because the house, the rain doesn't get in there under the eave. Everything started growing so much better once I put them on a drip. And I did see somebody had a question about how long to keep them on the drip. It's almost impossible to say that because it's so weather dependent. Right. I run my drip in that area for I don't know, it's winter, so I've forgotten. But once a day I run it once a day. And everything I grow in that area is annuals, and I run it once a day, and I probably run that drip for maybe half an hour. So it's probably like a half a gallon from each emitter, something like that. I don't know. I think it's one of those things you just got to play with it and kind of see how things go. But in any case, consistent water is what they want. Like you said, they don't really want to be shocked. They just want smooth sailing the whole way.
Absolutely. That's why I think that was probably the biggest problem last year. We had a drought, and it's usually it always rains here a lot. And so I don't have any irrigation. I have zero. And with 100 dahlias, you're not going to be out there with a watering can.
Right, exactly.
So I'm not going to be. So yeah, so they went dry, and I agree. Consistency is absolutely the key.
And then deadheading. Hey, Marissa, do you have that photo of the deadheading? Hopefully we can put this up because the deadheading is kind of key. And
all right.
So this is a photo. Just gonna flip over that. So this is a photo. When you guys look at this, you see how that flower on the right is pointed. That's a spent flower bud, and the one to the left, that's a new flower bud. You see how it's nice and round. So what you want to do is when you're deadheading is cut off any that have that kind of pointy look. And if they get a little old, they'll even get a little slimy kind of. And then when you're deadheading, don't just nip the tip off. Nip it all the way down to where it meets something else. Don't just nip it off and have that raw stem there. Nip it back to wherever it's meeting another flower stem, or if all the flowers on that stem are already spent, cut it back to the next spot because you want it to keep producing new flowers.
And if you want long stems, if you're growing for an event or bouquets or something like that, it's really instructed to visit a flower farm, as I have, and see how deep they cut those. So there'll be a flower and they'll go right back to the main stalk and cut off all those side branches with all those buds. Those are tossed in order to get a big long stem. So at home, we don't usually have to do that, but when you do cut hard like that, they do produce longer stems.
Yeah, and it all depends. Like you said, it sort of depends on what your goal is as far as why you're growing. If you're just growing them, like I think you and I both mostly grow them just for beautiful flowers in our garden. And yes, of course, we cut them and use them in bouquets on occasion. But the primary thing is in our garden.
Right.
If you're growing them, like you said, for cut flowers, or if you're, then there are, remember, like, if once you get really into it, people get into showing dahlias, and that's when you're pinching out side buds, and that's a whole other world that I am not prepared to talk about.
Let's hope we don't get there.
I did win some blue ribbons at the county fair, I'll have you know, but
wow, cool.
There weren't a lot of entries either, so. So, hey, before we move on, I did see a question that Marissa pointed out from Karen about crown gall. I'm going to see if there. Kath, do you want to just talk about crown gall a little bit? Because it is, people are talking about it a lot these days.
Yeah. So the first time I saw this was last year. And it's actually, from the research I've done, it's leafy gall. Crown gall actually creates a little hard, which you see on like euonymus sometimes and other kinds of shrubs. You'll see like a hard gall on the stems. That's really crown gall. And maybe there are other ways it appears, but the leafy gall is what happens at the top of the crown of the plant, so it's kind of confusing. Sounds like it should be crown gall, but leafy gall makes all these little tiny leaves right at the crown where the first stems come out of the ground. And it's a bacterial disease. From what I've learned, and I've talked to a woman there's a professor on the West Coast, I think she's in Oregon, who's like the country's foremost person on leafy gall. And she had not heard of it being on dahlias before. So, and we're hearing that from Holland too. Most of our dahlias are imported from Holland. So it's a relatively new problem as far as we can tell. And one of the issues that happens, and it's the same with dahlia viruses, is that sometimes it takes stress to bring out these problems. So whether it was stressful weather or what it was, I don't know. The short answer is we're learning about it. And I don't know how big of a problem it is yet. You can test for it. It's pretty involved. You have to do like a, microscope tests with all kinds of stuff. And I guess we're just going to have to see. I had one plant that I found with it last fall, and I tossed the plant.
Yeah, and that's what's advised to do, correct?
Anyone do that
is to just toss it, get it out of there.
Because you don't want to, it's in, like a virus, it's actually in the plant, the bacteria, and it lives on, this particular bacteria lives kind of on near the surface. It's right on the tissue on the outer part of the tuber. But it goes far enough into it that you can't just dip the tuber like and disinfect it and kill it that way. It's actually from what I understand, it's inside the tuber to some extent. So I don't know what this means. Hopefully not a bad thing, but we don't really have a good sense of how pervasive it is yet. But if you see it, we want to know about it for sure. If you bought your tubers from Longfield, we want to know about it and get rid of the tubers. I hate to say it, and look for it. Sometimes it doesn't show up right away. Like you might not see it on the dahlia when you're planting it. Sometimes it shows up at the end of the season when you're digging up your plants. That's when I found it.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wish I knew more, but I don't. If people have more questions, I can try to help. But
yeah. So should we just talk? I know people have a lot of questions, but we are going to talk a little bit about some of our favorites.
Okay.
So do you want to go first about some of your returning favorites and why you love them so much? Because I think this is where it gets exciting. Everybody loves talking about their favorite dahlias, right?
Yeah. Okay. Here's 3 favorites from,
well, there we go.
There they are from this past summer.
Yeah.
Zundert Mystery Fox, which we're carrying this year. I think we may be out of it since I put this together, but you may be able to find it somewhere else. It's this really crazy coral color, which I don't know how well that comes across here, but I've never seen a dahlia this color. And it's also, I think the name comes from the fact that there are flowers on the same plant that have different colors. So it's like this really deep coral, then there'll be more of a pinker version and a redder version. And it's a ball dahlia. It's about probably 3 inches across. So I find that I love that size. And the ball dahlias, I think we both have, we're sort of in a ball dahlia phase.
Yep.
And they're just like, the plants produce tons of them. They're super durable. They last a really long time in a vase. And they're just like a miracle. This, like Cornell Bronze, is it Fibonacci spiral of that?
Yeah.
I could look at that all day long. I think that is just the most amazing thing. Cornell Bronze, you can find it. We weren't able to get it this year at Longfield, but I think we're going to have it next year. It has just a little bit of that kind of, I don't know, pinkish color in the middle, but mostly it's just a soft orange. And that's bigger. It's probably, I'm looking at my 1, 2, 3, 4. It's probably 3 to 4 inches across. And then Rip City is just, I don't know, if you grow that, you're just going to love that. It's velvety. It's more of a classic dahlia form, but it's not too big. It's maybe 5 inches across. And
I've heard a lot of people say that Rip City is the best dark dahlia. That's what
it's really vigorous. You get tons of flowers. The center's darker than the outside, and it's really velvety. So pretty.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. That's beautiful.
I'm working on some too.
That's great. Marissa, you want to flip over to mine? So, okay, so Breakout. So Breakout is actually one that Kath said, you just grow it. You have to. So you are fully responsible for that one. So that's a dinner plate. And it's really interesting because I think, Kath, when you told me about it, you said, if you like Cafe au lait, you need to grow Breakout. And Cafe au lait is really a color changer, at least in my experience. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit more muted. But Breakout just has these sort of soft pinks with this yellow center. And sometimes the pinks get a little darker towards the edges. It's also got wider petals. Mm. So it has almost like the flower is a little flatter. And what's interesting to me is that it always seems to point out. Sometimes some of these other ones have a tendency to point down. And it always points out, showing its face to everyone, which is really nice. And nice for the garden, but also really good for a vase because of that, I think. Mm. And then Joey Morella was new for me last year. So there's my ball dahlia from last year. I planted that. Now that one I barely staked. I just needed sort of, it's a shorter one. So I just put in a bamboo stake for every plant and just kind of loosely twined it to a bamboo, like a shorter bamboo stake. So you never even saw the staking on it. It was just kind of to keep everything sort of generally in the right direction so the whole plant didn't kind of tip over. It bloomed for me. It was one of the first ones to start blooming for me last year. So that would be in July. And it bloomed, as most dahlias do, straight through to frost. And it just kept putting out these great dark flowers. I'm such a sucker for lighter colored flowers and orangier flowers that I need more of this contrast, I think. And it always looks really good in a vase. And the centers stay closed on it, which I kind of like in a ball dahlia. I don't necessarily like those centers to show. So the centers stay closed for a long time on it. They even look good as they fade. I actually think this one that I took a picture of is probably, it's just a touch going over because it's starting to get that sort of more magenta around the edges. Right. But it looks great in that form too. So that's why I took a picture of it, even when it was starting to go over a little bit.
They're so dense. The heads are just like packed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
then HS Date is my, that's my love. I can't imagine being without that one. The best thing about HS Date, which you can kind of see in the background of the picture, it's got dark foliage. So that's where it gets to be, I think, a really good garden plant because it's got that other interest to it, even when it's not blooming. And I find butterflies on it all the time. Big magnet for that. And then I think actually that these singles are ones that if people want to grow in containers, I think they should think a lot about growing these singles because they bloom as long as you keep deadheading them, they don't stop blooming. And so that's great in a container where you always want it to look good.
Yeah, and that dark foliage is pretty in a container too.
I do have some of those other HS series ones, which stands for Happy Single. I finally figured that out like 2 years into growing them. I have a couple of those other ones which are good, but I always go back to HS date because it's that orange can change a little bit. Sometimes it's really a true orange. Sometimes it's a little bit more terracotta. Sometimes it actually goes sort of apricot, peachy even.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Yeah. So that's a winner for me. That is absolutely a must grow for me. Do you want to talk about some new ones that you're going to be growing this year that you're excited about?
Yep. So I don't know what phase this is, but Fashion Monger, I've never grown this. I'm kind of enamored with the collarettes, as I said a little earlier. I grew a couple of them last year. So this one, I don't know. This is all I've seen as a picture. I've never seen it in real life, so we'll see. I have no idea. Burlesque, it's a pom-pom, so it has the ball shape, but it's smaller. So this is about a 2.5 inch flower, maybe 3. And it looks pink here, but it's kind of it's got some kind of orangey parts to it, and then in the middle there's also a purplish thing. So I like the ones that have a bunch of different colors in it because they, in a bouquet, you can really, they're kind of a bridge flower to different colors. So, and it makes a lot of flowers, and they have very long stems that are pretty stiff, which is also nice. And then Senior's Hope, I just think the color is amazing, and it's
unbelievable. This is going to get expensive for me. I can see. Oh my gosh, that one is unbelievable.
Yeah. So I don't know if we still have that in stock either because we were not able to get a lot of it. But if you can get your hands on that, I'm pretty psyched about that one.
How big does that flower get on that one?
That's about a 3 to 4 inch flower. It's not a really big flower.
And so is that sort of it's a pinky mauve-y kind of color? Is that sort of the color range on it?
Yeah, I mean, I've only seen it once in person. And it's, have you grown Creme De Cassis?
No, I haven't. I've seen it, but I haven't grown it.
It's, this is one of those color changing dahlias where it looks pretty different, and it depends like where it's being grown and if it's early summer or late summer. But it has this dark undertone on the reverse side of the petals that gives it that kind of, I don't know, magic that I find compelling.
That is.
I'll let you know.
It's gorgeous. Wow, that's got amazing potential there. Wow, neat.
That's a zinnia down there on the right. That is.
Yeah, and that's really cool. I mean, I always think zinnias and dahlias go so well together in a bouquet, but look at
that's combo. That's probably one of the queen limes, right?
Yes, I think that's probably I bet you that's the red one, maybe. Yeah. Well, that's a beauty. Don't everybody go rush out and buy that. Save some for me.
Because you want some,
right? Okay. I had said I was not doing. I was done shopping for dahlias. I like avert my eyes because whatever. But my weakness. So on my list for varieties. So this is really funny. Because you guys, there's the collarette. So this is really funny. Kath and I just had this conversation, a couple of months ago. And I actually think we had a conversation like a couple of years ago where we said, I don't know about those collarettes. Yeah. And now we're both totally into the
what's the big deal? I know.
Right? So this Kelsey Sunshine is actually pretty, but there's another one. Unfortunately, I think that one is sold out. It's Kelsey Annie Joy. It's kind of in that apricot range that I seem to always go for. But these collarettes are really interesting. And I think it's a natural progression because I like the singles so much that I like these collarettes because they're like singles with flair.
Right. But I did this one last summer and it is really beautiful. This really captures it. It's very pale yellow. I don't like strong yellows. And this is just, it goes with everything.
Yeah, that's exactly what I like about it. I agree. I think in my garden in particular, a really goldy yellow is a tough to work in, but this works in my garden in particular really well with all the pinks and the apricots and stuff that I have going on. White Onesta, I have decided that now this is a little bit of a this has a little bit of a water lily type form to it. I don't know if it's technically classified as a water lily form or not, but this one I really like. I don't grow, I think I've only grown 1 or 2 white dahlias, and I decided it was time to remedy that. And I like this one because I think it kind of has, you don't really see it as much in this picture, but it gets kind of a little chartreusey in the center, I think. And I love that color. So once it opens up, I just think it's very pure, nice color and very simple, which I think is kind of nice in a white dahlia. And then Wizard of Oz is one that I saw everywhere last year. The whole world was posting about Wizard of Oz. And so I'm like, well, why wouldn't you need another ball dahlia? So,
yeah, I haven't grown that one.
Yeah, so I'm excited. I am really excited about all of those. Well, I'm excited about every dahlia, so it doesn't really matter, I guess. So should we maybe try to see if we can find some questions that people have asked? And I know Marissa has sent a few over as well. Let me just see if I can read some of them. So Bumbling Garden asked about can you use horizontal netting instead of stakes? Would that work? I don't know. I mean, you've been to flower farms. I'm thinking that's not necessarily going to work, but have you seen that at flower farms at all?
I think the stalks are too, at the base of the plant, you have a stalk that's, that big around.
Yeah.
And with a whole bunch of really big leaves. And the netting that's used for those flowers is about 4 inches.
Yeah.
And I don't think it would work. Yeah. And it's also not, you really need something strong to hold those branches.
The telemarketers are calling. Sorry, guys. Just ignore it.
The netting is great for like, snapdragons and asters and those kinds of things. For dahlias, and I think they're just too bulky.
Yeah, I agree. I have a hard time seeing how that would work. Here, really good question. Lubia had a question about growing dahlias in pots. Any advice on how to grow them in pots, soil type, fertilizer, and how often to feed? My comment on that would be, and I think I'm going to throw that over to you, Kath, but my first comment on that would be, you're just going to I think a bigger pot is probably going to be better for more consistent moisture rather than trying to jam them in a small pot. And I would also say, I always recommend for pots, I just don't think that the dinner plate dahlias are well suited to growing. I mean, I'm sure you can grow anything in a container you set your mind to. I just don't think they're the best suited to growing in a container. What do you think about that?
Agree. I would look for the ones that are 3 feet or under. And there's a lot. I think they're going to look better because they're fuller and the flowers are of a scale that's better. The dinner plates, a lot of them just get kind of, I don't know, they're fabulous, but they're not always a pretty plant. Would you say?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that I just don't feel like with those dinner plates, you just don't get the same amount of blooms as you get with these smaller ones that just keep producing the flowers.
That's right. I mean, flower farmers count on getting, I think it's like 4 or 6 flowers for the season from a dinner plate plant. I mean, they're cutting them long, but still, it's just not that many flowers.
Right.
And we want lots of flowers.
Yeah, especially, I mean, we're growing these for beautiful gardens, so
yeah,
we want them for sure.
And especially in a pot.
Yeah. Food forest next door wanted to know about deer being a problem. And I know you guys get this question at Longfield all the time. You guys know that for anyone who doesn't know, I have a massive deer problem here. And I don't find that the deer target them at all. But I know some people have said, you've heard that some people have said they have issues with them, right?
Yeah, I don't have trouble with them either. Yeah. I don't, but, where deer are a problem,
right?
I don't know, they'll eat almost anything.
Right.
I don't think it's their preferred food.
Right. Yeah, I think they're going... If you've got a hosta somewhere in your yard, they're heading over there first. So
we know which ones are their preferred foods.
Right, exactly. let's see. Oh, a lot of questions about storing and what to do when you see your tubers starting to shrivel up a little bit in storage.
What I do is I get a bucket and I put some like Pro Mix in there and I moisten that, not wet, but moist. And then I put a few handfuls of that in the bag. I usually store my dahlias in plastic garbage bags that I leave open at the top. So whatever you're putting it in, you might have it in a box or something. And I just pack some of that barely moist growing mix around the tubers. And so it's not wet, but it allows them to absorb a little moisture if they need it. Other times I've like flicked some handfuls of water in there.
Yeah, I take my little spritzer and go in there. I will say that I will plant, as long as the tuber is not rotten or completely desiccated when I pull it up. If it's a little shrivelly, I plant it anyways, and I don't have a problem. They seem to grow fine.
But if they're shriveling in January, by April they might be too much.
Yes, yes, exactly. Right. And I do always say, make sure you check on your tubers. Yeah. I say about once a month, which is about all I can manage.
Yeah, because I find it's more likely that they're too wet. But it depends. Like when I dug them last year, in fact, I saved very few because we had that early frost and they hadn't started to harden off, and they were still growing. So when I dug them, they sprouted, and I was like, what am I going to do with these? You know, so I threw a bunch of them out.
Yeah.
But it kind of depends, like how wet it was when you dug them or dry it was.
Yeah. So one of the questions Denise asked, and this is ironic that I, of all people, would even pretend to answer this question, but how close together can I plant dahlias? So I think it depends a lot on the type of dahlia, because your dinner plates are going to go more, I mean, they're heading for the sky, but like the shorter ones, you want a nice bushy plant, so you want some room there. Last year I planted dinner plate dahlias 18 inches apart, maybe even less in some cases. I wouldn't go any closer than that. That's for sure. Yeah. I would say, keep in mind, the closer you put them, the more they want from you. So they're all competing in there for stuff. I don't know. Do you have a general rule of thumb?
I use 18 as a general rule. But the ones that are going to be short, you can, I usually plant mine in a raised bed that's about 2 feet across, and I stagger them.
Okay.
So they're 18 inches apart, but they're staggered down the row, so I get more in.
Yeah, there you go. That's great. How do you get to the? Are you planting dinner plates like that too? I mean, how do you get to the top to cut them if you're already in a raised bed? Is it not?
Well, the bed's only about, it's like 6 inches tall. It's just, it doesn't have sides. It's just
right.
Yeah.
I hear you. I'm just trying to see if there's any other questions that we haven't really hit on that Marissa has thrown our way. So Soil Margaritas is asking about containers too. I would say the one thing that we didn't, that I sort of went over this about the container question, was what about fertilizing dahlias in containers? Oh, and best fertilizer. We can talk about that too, because Kim's on that. Do you have any preferences on that?
I don't know. I think fertilizing dahlias there's a big, like there's so much controversy with dahlias because I think they're so variable from one variety to another, but they are really variable from one part of the country to another, how they grow and what they do and what kind of soil you have and what kind of summer it was and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's hard to say. And I've tried, since I've been doing it for 12 or 15 years, I've tried like every year. It's like, okay, here's what I'm going to do this year. So last year I used Osmocote, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to try to fertilize them. And I gave them each, like, I don't know, a tablespoon or two on the soil surface, probably the end of June, maybe. So gave them a chance. I don't think it's good to fertilize them right away. I think they need to kind of get going. But it was so dry, the Osmocote probably didn't really work. and there were so many other issues. So I've tried that. I know they like a lot of compost. I always put a couple inches of compost all down the beds. And I've used seaweed, I've used fish, I've used, all kinds of stuff. I don't know. I can't, there's no conclusion. Generally in pots, I tend to just feed more than I would in the garden bed. So I think if you're growing dahlias in pots, you got to water them consistently and fertilize them. And I'd fertilize at least once a month.
Oh yeah, I would say at least probably twice that. Yeah, every 2 weeks would be my guess. Yeah, I use a lot of seaweed fertilizer, comfrey fertilizer, fish food. I mean, I generally go with the organic stuff, liquid stuff once they're in. I do sort of amend the bed ahead of time before I plant, typically with just like a espoma plant tone or something, just like a general organic kind of all-purposey one, which I just sort of do for the bed anyways with all those other annuals that are going in there. But I don't throw anything in the hole when I'm planting them.
No, I don't think that's a good thing, because I think that the tubers are kind of sensitive.
Yeah.
And they're making, if you look at how the roots come out of the tubers, they're these little tiny white, hairy things. And I don't think they would like touching fertilizer.
Yeah, no, right. I think I'll just grab one last question here that I see going by, which is about dividing tubers, and Bumbling Gardener wanted to know if you divide tubers before storing or before planting. And everybody does it differently. So as far as I know, the advantage to dividing tubers before you store them is that they're easier to cut apart then. They're not so hard. And I think, like, especially if you're going to be, I mean, for people who are farming out their dahlia tubers to somebody else or something, obviously that's helpful too. I store mine and divide in spring is how I do it for two reasons. One, I find it a lot easier to see the eyes in spring. And of course you have to make sure you have an eye or there's no point in dividing. Also, I just wait to see, I mean, I'd hate to go through all the trouble of dividing them all, storing them all, and then something is wrong with that tuber anyway. So I figure they get through, I decide what I like and that, what looks good, and then I divide. When do you divide?
I do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Plus by the fall, I'm just not interested. I just like getting them out of the ground and in a bag and in the basement.
Yeah, there is that in fall.
Enough,
the interest level is much lower. You're right. It's just a miracle.
But it is, I mean, it is hard in the spring because the stalks are really hard. And it's, you got to get in there with your pruners and knives and all kinds of stuff to get them apart. And you need the room to store them.
Yes,
because they take up a lot more room when you're storing a clump. If you're really limited on space, I think it's another reason to divide them in the fall, because you can lay them down. And
a couple of years ago, I did the storage method where you divide them and then you wrap them all individually in plastic. I think I saw that North Hill Flower Farm did that this year too. And you wrap them all in plastic. And I will say it worked perfectly. Every single one worked great. But holy cow, that was a lot of work. Like, I do not have the energy or the time for that in fall. I just cannot get myself into it enough in fall. So, it's time for a winter's rest for a gardener in fall.
Yeah, I'm with you. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think we're sort of at the time we had kind of aimed for here. Did you have any parting words you wanted to say, Kath? Or where do you want, or maybe you want to just talk about how there are a lot of great guides and stuff on the Longfield Gardens site for people?
Yeah. There's articles about the different types of dahlias. There's articles about colors. We have all kinds of color things. There's a lot on there. Just on the nav bar, there's a learning section, and there's all kinds of stuff in there. I'd say that dahlias are a journey. And get on the bandwagon, because there'll be a time, I think, in another 10 years or so where they're kind of out of favor again, I would guess. They, like all flowers, they kind of come and go. I mean, what we're seeing right now is kind of a resurgence with glads. And glads have been really on the outs for I don't know, like all of my life. But people are starting to grow glads again.
Everything that's old is new again, I guess.
Yeah, so dahlias are definitely having their day. There's so many cool varieties, and there's a lot of breeding going on now too. From seed, dahlias are, they have more chromosomes than most other plants, and it means there's a lot of variability and just kind of an infinite number of different looks you can get. And there's quite a few people experimenting with that. So there's, there'll be no shortage of desirable varieties in our lifetime, I'm sure.
That's kind of the really cool thing is that what we're seeing now in dahlias is a lot of small growers who are sort of doing this breeding, and you get these really interesting varieties. And that is definitely when I have to avert my eyes.
Yeah, me too.
If I buy every dahlia that catches my eye, we're gonna need a farm or something. I don't know, and that's not happening. So, well, listen, you guys, thank you everyone for coming. If you have, do check out the growing guides and stuff that's at Longfield Gardens. You guys know that I have like a bajillion things about dahlias on my website and videos and all that stuff. Or, hit me up if you got some really tough questions you can't get answered, and I'll hit up Kath if I can't answer those questions too. So, but I would say, you're going to want a dahlia. You just know summer's going to come. Actually, I would say this is the one thing I want to say about dahlias are so good because in my garden looks its best because of this obsession I have. My garden looks best when a lot of other people's gardens are basically done for the year. It is such a good way to extend your season. Because they get going. I mean, September, my garden looks amazing, and so many other gardens are just falling apart then. So
absolutely,
it's another good reason to think about growing them. And
it's a good compliment to being a perennial gardener, to having beautiful perennial beds, and you just need your dahlia area for when those are starting to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks so much, Kath. This was really fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Happy gardening.
Yep. Happy gardening, everybody. See ya.